Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We thought much ado, I would like on your behalf to welcome the Minister. We've continued to call you Minister PJ here, PG, okay, and I promise it's not PG glass. And Minister Jonas, it's really an honor for us that in your busy schedule you have really agreed to address us on a topic: faith-inspired communities, active citizens that ensure that the national resources are used for the common good and that no one is left behind. Minister Pravin needs no introduction, ladies and gentlemen. And Minister, in our midst we have some people from the business sector. We have, on the whole, church leaders, and we have Sheikh, who is Vice President of NRSAD, which is an interfaith ministry, if I may term it that way, within the CDD Trust, that seeks to be part of the solution in South Africa rather than part of the problem. And again, as a background, we met from this morning and this afternoon, and we read from a particular text within the Christian Bible, John 10:10. In that text, we wrestled with the following excerpt: that a thief comes in to steal, to rob, and to destroy. But I have come so that you may have life and have it abundantly. And so in wrestling with this particular scriptural passage, we wondered, what is the common good? What is our responsibility to one another? What is our responsibility to you and to our government? And what are some of the things that we can do, not against, but for the development of that common good and abundant life for all? And so with that really brief summary of what we're wrestling with, Minister, I invite you to address the audience.
I've never been before so many bishops, archbishops, reverends, sheikhs, I think for a long, long time to hear of. Good evening to all of you. It's a great honor and privilege, not only for myself, but for Deputy Minister Jonas, as our Director General Fuzile has also come to some inspiration as he finishes the final chapters of the medium-term budget policy statement in the next 48 hours. But thank you for the privilege of sharing some thoughts with you on what is a very important topic, not only in South Africa, but I am sure in many, many parts of the world, and a message which I think is resonating in all parts of the globe, a message which says, how do we ensure that all 7 billion people on this globe live without poverty, without misery, with dignity, with all the basic human rights of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights assures them, and that indeed, as your title says, no one is left behind. But I think all of us, as Bishop, also know that the dream of leaving no one behind is a dream, an aspiration, and a goal which has inspired leaders and activists in different forms over many, many centuries, indeed throughout human history, I'm sure. It's in our religious texts from all of our backgrounds, it's in all of our history books, it's inspired great heroism, it's inspired great sacrifice, it's demanded from time to time that both individuals and groups of individuals make choices, as you point out, either to steal or rob or to build the common good. And it's these moments in both collective and individual lives that decide which side of integrity you stand on, which side of the common good you stand on as groups and as individuals. I'll just trace in our own case in South Africa, our own evolution of the aspiration for working with for the common good. There have been many in our history that have done that. It's impossible to cover all of them. But the document that many of us grew up with is the Freedom Charter, politically. And it's in this Freedom Charter which gives very concrete expression to this ideal of the common good. Not only does it say that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, but it also says that the people shall share in the country's wealth. It continues to insist that the national wealth of our country, which is the heritage today of all 55 million people, must be both shared and restored to all of our people. But dreams and aspirations, as you know, are one thing. Realizing them is quite another, a point I'll come back to in a moment. But this aspiration is also contained, interestingly, in our Constitution, which today acts as the bedrock of our democracy, acts as a timely warning from time to time of the values that should be guiding all of us, not just in thought, but also in action. And the Bill of Rights, and indeed the preamble of the Constitution, reminds us of the terrible past we come from, of the huge responsibility we have to overcome that past, but not live in that past, and dwell on it too much. Recognize the sacrifices that all of us have made in different ways, but also recognize the contribution people have made to healing our society as well. The Bill of Rights itself, of course, is amongst the most modern that humanity has before it today, and entrenches, amongst other things, human dignity and the fundamental rights that all human beings should enjoy. But I think we also know that having rights in the Bill of Rights of a Constitution is again setting a framework for society to understand what are they possibly entitled to. But whether they actually become entitled to it depends, I'm afraid, not just on goodwill. It depends on the extent to which a particular constituency or category of citizens are organized to exercise the innate strength, resilience, ability, but above all, determination to ensure that rights are made into reality. In today's terms, one would argue that perhaps a broader concept, which is one I'm sure you're a lot more familiar with than I am, but one which I find and many others find very attractive, is the concept of social justice. It's one which incorporates a much broader ambit of rights, if you like, but constantly reminds us that a few people having some of the rights, many people being aware of the rights, is not the ideal that we're working for. That ultimately citizens are actually saying around the globe today, and indeed in South Africa, as we saw on the 3rd of August, that they want to see palpably what social justice brings to them. They want to feel palpably what it is that the difference in their lives are at a day-to-day level in terms of the changes that they experience and the improved quality that they witness themselves. The third aspect is that all of this needs to be achieved in a world which we are all told is undergoing an intense period of globalization, a period in which the world is flat. I'm sure many of you have read a book called by that title, that we are all interconnected, that there are much more rapid connectivities in terms of communication, in terms of finance, in terms of trade, than we've ever had in human history before. And it is this very globalization that the world has been undergoing for the last 20 or 30 years that in a very interesting way is today being questioned. It's being questioned not because of the pluses that it has brought to humanity and to society, because they indeed have been pluses. More trade does help nations to export whatever they are good at exporting. It's good for our young people, and indeed some of the older ones that are sitting here, to be better connected to the communication systems. News flow on a minute-by-minute, if not second-by-second basis, at least keeps us informed of what Donald Trump just said a minute ago. But it also has downsides to it as well, because the news flow and its quality and its content and its orientation depends on who owns the channel. We take it for granted that because you have 24 hours news, it's objective, it's real, it's unbiased, and it shares the truth as it should be told. But today's world is asking some questions about who owns it, what biases enter it, and whose value systems are communicated, but above all, whose interests are communicated through these mechanisms as well. And so, in recent months, particularly post-Brexit, but events around that as well, we find when we attend some of our international meetings, in particular the IMF and World Bank annual meetings in the last few weeks, that there's an increasing concern, even amongst world leaders, that this globalization phenomenon has benefited a few. It's made possible huge progress for humanity technologically, in terms of financial flows, because we beneficiaries of some of the financial flows as well. The Director General used to head the asset and liability section of the Treasury. So his worry would constantly be, who's going to buy his bonds? That's our debt, by the way. He was just a salesman. So today, South Africa has borrowed 2 trillion rands, both from South African institutions and foreign institutions as well. So financial flows do matter in helping us to balance the books, so to speak, and enabling us to, in fact, ensure that in our own humble way, we do indeed make sure that no one is, in fact, left behind. But the question that is being raised about globalization is that there are indeed too many people left behind, that various sections of society don't feel the direct benefit between the GDP number that we see all over the show and the actual benefits to themselves. And most acutely, in the biggest economy in the world, the United States, I'm sure you've read this many times over, the middle classes believe, and factually it is proven, that over 2 decades there's been very little change in real terms in their income. So while the 1% and the 10% has been accumulating anything up to 60% of the national income, and there are similar proportions in South Africa as well, the vast majority are left out of the benefit. And so that raises important new questions. So how do we detach ourselves from globalization? Some people call it deglobalization. Do we, in fact, reshape globalization so that it becomes more aligned with the objective of social justice and to ensure that no one is left behind? Is there something wrong with the institutions of governance and of economic management and control over those institutions, which leads to these imbalances and the appropriation of economic benefits by a few? And above all, there's a huge trust deficit that is growing. The deficit between what I normally call elites, business, CEOs, bankers, and perhaps some of us as well that are sitting in this room. I'm sure you don't mind being included. And people on the ground who are actually saying that you seem to be getting all of the benefits. Where's our share, both in economic terms and in terms of privileges as well? At the beginning of each year, in recent times, there's an institution called Edelman's that produces a study on trust deficits just before the Davos summits that take place in January. And the increasing trend in those studies is this growing trust deficit between elites on the one hand and citizens of various categories on the other hand. But this alienation and this distance also gives rise to populism of different kinds. And as you can see in Europe and many other parts of the world, the wrong kind of populism begins to develop, and one which leads to what we would normally call right-wing politics, a more conservative orientation, anti-immigration tendencies, and ultimately anti-human rights tendencies begin to develop, as you've begun to see. The counter-narrative to this is the growth of another set of concepts, if you like. And now, it's interesting, in the last, say, 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 months, there's a huge shift from just GDP growth to inclusive growth. So the emphasis is on how do we include more people? How do we ensure that economic growth is not one which awaits for the trickle-down phenomenon for the 55 million people or 54 million people to benefit, while the 1 million cream off the top in some ways. The second is the whole question of joblessness, youth, their future, the impact of technology, and how do we prepare for this very different kind of future in a way in which inclusivity is actually emphasized as well. The third question that arises is the question of institutions, as I mentioned earlier on, because there's now lots of interesting studies which seem to indicate that any democracy can have institutions. It can have reserve banks and treasuries and fiscal institutions and political institutions. But having the institution is one thing. It's the orientation of those institutions that matter. It's who do those institutions serve, and whom are they controlled by, and in whose interest do they work at the end of the day, and how do they balance the different interests in society that will ultimately make the difference. Which then raises the question of leadership, values, and the kind of integrity with which those institutions are led as well. And whether that institution is a religious institution, or a non-religious one, or an economic one, or a political one, I think from our experience we know doesn't really matter. So the shift, distinguished guests, is towards greater inclusivity, a greater focus on how do we share the benefits within our economies and societies better. How do citizens actually palpably feel that their lives are changing for the better? And in a sense, a different discourse needs to take place, which ensures that corporations, I'm not going to name them, but you buy cell phones from them and all sorts of things, that have anything up to $250 billion left offshore of a particular country so that they don't pay tax, or pay 2% tax, or 5% tax. Now, I don't know what church leaders earn, so I don't want to risk getting into that area. But what we have always developed as a narrative in South Africa is the question of paying your fair share. So is the fair share being paid by big, large corporates? Are they making, particularly in a very constrained fiscal environment, globally and elsewhere, their fair contribution to creating the right kind of fiscal capacity for countries to do what they actually have to do? And in that context, we've got to challenge ourselves and start a discourse which I think the faith community is going to be very central to, and that is, how do we reconceptualize economic growth? What are the new parameters that are developing as a challenge to all of us? Now, those of us that are in the front line of trying to promote our economy are not going to have enough time to look at this reconceptualization, because we will have to worry about the ratings agencies and show that our economy is growing at least above 1 or 2%, make sure our fiscal balances are right, convince you that we are capable managers of your money, because it's your money that we manage at the end of the day as government. But in doing so, we also look at, and should look at, the transformative elements that need to enter into this discourse about growth. Similarly, at the heart of growth should be social justice. How does social solidarity play itself out? How do the scriptures in all of our faiths, or even the inverted commas scriptures of the non-believers, begin to find expression in concrete terms in the way in which practical programs are introduced by government which actually give expression to the idea of social justice. But as I said earlier on, growth and social justice, the Bill of Rights, the aspirations in our Constitution are not going to be automatically delivered to us. They are a function of the political arrangements within a society. They are a function of the economic structure that you find in any society, or indeed a part of the globe. They are a function of, we're back to the old days of Karl Marx. It's a function of the alignment of classes. Which economic interests, put differently, which economic interests are dominant? Which economic interests, as somebody put it to me the other day, who are the soldiers of the poor? There are many soldiers for the rich. Who are the soldiers of the poor? And it can't be just left to the faith communities to be the soldiers of the poor. Governments like ours have also been soldiers of the poor. And how do you entrench in the new generations that of young people who are ensconced in the values of consumerism, materialism, accumulation, instant gratification, the whole idea of social solidarity, the whole idea of sharing, the whole idea of sacrifice, and the whole idea of ensuring that the common good and the personal good find some balance between themselves at the end of the day. And I think it is in this kind of context that we have to both have these debates, but give content to the notion of inclusive growth and social solidarity. Now, as part of the political, economic, vested interests configuration, if you like, is the whole question that I raised earlier on of institutions. And I think we're all learning that it's not individuals that matter. What matters is, what did that individual or set of individuals do in their lifetime or in their stewardship of a particular institution to ensure that they leave that institution stronger, leave that institution people-orientated, leave that institution with the right integrity and set of values, and ensure that those institutions contribute to the common good and the inclusivity that we are talking about in the current context. And we are a young country, we are a young democracy. We've inherited some of our institutions from the past, and we've transformed many of them as well. So the challenge in the years ahead, and even in the current period, as we go through some of the challenges that we have in our country, but also the bright spots that we have in our country, is to be constantly mindful that institutions matter. And institutions can either be exclusive or exclusionary, or they can be inclusionary. So we can decide that we become an elite club of X or Y or Z fraternity, and everybody else gets left outside, or we ensure that we go out of our way to practice whatever it is that we need to practice, or implement the programs of the institutions in a way in which there's optimal inclusion of people, that vested interests are not in a position to take control of institutions to serve themselves. Now, there are lots of examples in the world of this, and perhaps it's idealistic to even think that we can talk about institutions that are inclusive in the idealistic sense, but then life is about having some dreams. It's about having some aspirations. It's about having something beyond today to strive for, so that we can indeed create a different kind of structure of society, a different kind of economy, and indeed achieve some of the dreams that all of us have, or aspirations that we have as we go forward. The big challenge in our own country, of course, in the institutional context, is how do institutions both become the subject of transformation, but also the agents of transformation. And one of the challenges that I think we have beginning to emerge in our country is the content that we give to the word transformation. So transformation for whom? Is it transformation for all of us so that we can drive the most expensive cars? Or is it transformation for all of our people so that they lead a life consistent with the Bill of Rights, the dignity that is ensured in the Bill of Rights, and that they can actually say that not only do we have access to water and sanitation, the right to vote and so on, but there's a material and qualitative difference in the way in which, even if my generation doesn't grow up in that way, my children are ensured that they will grow up in a very different way from the way we are seeing things at the moment. And I think that transformation is also the subject of contestation, because if we have a particular vested interest on this side of the room, then you are going to do everything to ensure that your vested interests are protected, and that these vested interests or these interests are going to be excluded. So I think more and more we need to give content to some of these concepts in a way in which they are consistent with the goal of social justice. They're consistent with the goal of ensuring that all 55 million people over a period of time are beneficiaries of the economic, social and other changes that we actually want to bring about in our society. And that contestation will again depend upon the configuration of politics, of economics, of business, of civil society and where it stands, including the faith community itself. And what is going to be critical in the outcome of this contestation is the kind of checks and balances that we build in our own democracy and in our own processes. Because again, if vested interests are given untrammeled rights, they will make sure that they will do things only for themselves. If on the other hand there are appropriate checks and balances in each dimension of our society, in the economy, in our politics, in business, in the faith community, I'm sure you have similar issues or needs as well, because we're human, we will make mistakes. We will use power and abuse power in different ways as well. So checks and balances, as we are witnessing over the recent period, play a very important part, provided they're managed in the right way, to ensure that we come out at the right end of this historical process. Now, how does that relate to our today's world? These are all nice aspirational things. But I think what government is trying to do, and certainly what we are as civil servants and political office bearers trying to do, is to ensure that as much as possible we do try to enhance the inclusive policies, that we do ensure that the limited resources that we have are shared in the right kind of way. And there's no doubt that over the last 22 years, we've made huge progress in South Africa. So whilst we have challenges today, let's not deny our successes. I think some people say that apart from the Marshall Plan that was implemented in Europe by the US after World War II, we've probably done some of the most phenomenal things in this country in transforming, at least at the level of basic needs, if not more than that, creating millions of people, new people in the middle class, amongst other things, to change the situation in South Africa. Secondly, we do have a vibrant democracy. As you can see from the elections, the operations of the courts, the operations of many of our institutions, they do work. And it's fascinating to meet people from other parts of the world, because when they come from country X, I don't want to put any country down, so I won't mention it, but it's a big emerging market country, which I heard about recently. They say, you guys in South Africa are doing extremely well. Country X is in a mess, politically, economically, etc. So many of the things that we are talking about are also relative. It depends who you want to compare yourself to. So we should be proud of our achievements, but being proud doesn't mean that we must be complacent. It means that we must defend the gains that we've actually made, make sure that no one is forced or is allowed to force us to retreat from the gains that we've made, that we manage our economy, our fiscus, and our social relations in a way in which we continue to build on the kind of solidarity that we've created up to now and the kind of inclusivity that we've created as well. But in doing so, we must actually recognize some of the challenges that lie ahead. The first of which is our economy is not inclusive. And it is still pretty much divided in terms of the kind of legacy that we've inherited, although there's been all sorts of changes that we've actually made. So one of our most passionate goals must be, how do we get more economic inclusion? How do the 5 or 6 million young people who walk the streets of South Africa every day without any sense of a job or a hope of exposure to work experience or an income of any kind, how are we going to inspire that generation to believe in themselves, to believe that this country, with all its resources, does have something to actually offer them as we go forward? We have amongst the smallest small business sector in economies of our size. Again, because of the structure that we've inherited from our past and our inability to support small and micro businesses in all sorts of ways. But at the same time, there's some fascinating initiatives, incubation projects of all sorts, CEOs of big companies that we are working with that are willing to set up a fund of R1.5 billion, CEOs that have retired who are willing to act as mentors. And I'm sure the faith community can act as a huge aggregation point to bring these sorts of resources together so that we can actually share them. The second is the inequality in our society. We are still regarded as amongst, if not the most unequal society in the world. And repeating the Gini coefficient is no longer good enough. Saying that we have various distribution programs is an effective response, but not an adequate response yet. So more needs to be done in line with our thinking about social justice to make sure that that inequality gap is narrowed. And I think the faith community has an important role to challenge all of us to say, how are you sharing your wealth? How are you sharing your resources? How are you enabling people to actually not only benefit from your generosity, but through their own enterprise, through their own creativity, and through their own energy as well. We can't wait another 50 years for a more equal society to be developed in South Africa. So a greater sense of urgency certainly needs to be generated amongst us. The third is to narrow the trust and moral deficit that we seem to be going through in our country at the moment. And here again, there are various divides or fault lines that impact upon us at this point in time. But again, we believe the kind of work in a very small way that the President has allowed and asked the business sector, government and labor to do from the beginning of this year, to see if we can create a common national front to advance the good name of our country, invite investments into our country, ensure that local business people have confidence in our own situation, ensure that we don't get downgraded as we didn't in June. We have another deadline to meet in December. Are all, I think, important small initiatives to build across the trust deficit amongst different sections of our society. But the moral part, I think the Archbishop is in a much better position to talk to us about than I would be in our current environment. So let me conclude by saying that leaving no one behind is, if you like, an historical ambition and goal that many people have espoused, articulated, worked for, sacrificed their lives for, and we have some of the best examples of that in our own country in the form of Nelson Mandela and others. Secondly, that it is still a goal in terms of our constitution and just our human aspiration that we must continue to aspire towards and never give up, notwithstanding the fact that we will have all sorts of vested interests that will want to intervene in that project. There will always be a selfishness that will drive human conduct from time to time. There will always, now selfishness is fine, but more recently there's lots of writings about selfishness being converted into greed. And when selfishness becomes greed, it becomes destructive of this grand project that we have of creating a better non-racial, non-sexist South Africa. Because greed means that after I've stolen my first 10,000 rands, remember it only has 4 noughts, my next ambition is to add another 4 instead of just another 1 nought. And that happens in the corporate sector, it happens in the government sector, it happens all over. But that's not good enough of a reason to allow it to continue to happen. And so how we collectively create a moral ethos which counters greed and ensures that the values of social justice win over greed ultimately is going to be a key factor. Because greed can then lead you and lead any individual to say, let my greed also enter the terrain of politics and seize political power so that I can satisfy my greed. It can reach the avenues of economic power. So I want to take economic power by whatever means and accumulate all sorts of wealth in whatever way, so that it is only me that benefits, it's not society that benefits at the end of the day. And I think what the majority of South Africans want is precisely the opposite. In fact, what the majority of the world wants is precisely the opposite. So with great respect, let me end by saying that the faith community has a critical role to play both now and in the future to constantly remind us of what is this social justice, how do we give it content, not just in terms of ideas, but in terms of the daily practices that we engage in. Remind us constantly of where is our moral compass, where's the true north. When our society is going wrong or we go wrong as individuals, show us where it is that we need to correct ourselves and create a dialectic, if you like, that ensures that there is this check and balance amongst all of us that produces the best possible outcomes. make our democracy a more resilient democracy, and one where institutions serve all of our people, and that even if some assume a little bit of power for themselves, that power and that resource that they have in their control is one that is used for the common good and not just for narrow purposes. Let's create an informed citizenry and an organized citizenry. You see, an informed citizenry sitting in a lounge watching whatever they're watching is one thing. But an organized citizenry is able to express themselves, both to you, to us, and indeed to other role players of influence in society as well. And so it's the organized citizenry that can make the real impact on ensuring that their interests are served as well as everybody else's as well. Challenge abuses in any quarter of any kind so that you remind us of what is the right thing to do. Help us to create a unity of purpose in our country, because that is what we sorely need. We have all the resources that we need in this country, but if we develop not just a common vision, but a common purpose, I think we'll make huge progress in our lives and give content to inclusive transformation. Transformation that is of benefit to all 55 million people in our country. And that transformation, as I pointed out, won't be an automatic process. It'll be a process of struggle, of contestation, but one which I hope will end in freedom, dignity, and opportunity for all of our people. Thank you very much.